So here to keep us updated and get us prepared on all of the changes that the IRS is making this year is Daniel Geltrude, founder of Geltrude & Company and author of Positive Financial Karma. Dan, always a pleasure. We definitely need some of that positive karma this year. So on that note, let's start with the good news. With the IRS making some changes after years of high inflation, how is that set to impact taxpayers?
So we are starting off with good news. So what's happening is that the tax brackets are being adjusted upward. Now, let's be clear here. Tax rates are not changing, but because of inflation, what the IRS is doing is they're adjusting the brackets. What does that mean? It means in a progressive tax system, as you make more money, you pay more taxes, and you jump into a higher tax bracket. So they are allowing for a 5.4% increase in your wage across the board before you jump into that next tax bracket. So what does that mean? It means more money in each of our pockets. So that's good news. The bad news is that we do have inflation, but at least there's a little bit of relief here from the IRS.
Okay, we will take that. That's for sure. Any tax rates that will not be impacted by this adjustment?
Well, no, everybody who is going to be increasing their wages this year, and hopefully that they have, they're going to have an extra 5.4% of cushion before they're going to end up paying a higher tax rate. And by the way, that also goes across to the standard deduction. So our standard deductions are also going to be raised up 5.4%.
Okay, a lot of people probably might not have taxes on their mind this early in the new year, Dan, but it is very good to start preparing. As we mentioned, the deadline will be here before we know it. And if you're going to reclaim money, you definitely want to get that sooner rather than later. What are steps that our viewers should be taking right now to prepare?
Well, you're exactly right in saying if you're due a refund, or you believe you are, you want to file as early as possible in order to be able to get that refund. Why let the IRS hold your money? So what you need to do is take a look at your prior year tax return. Look at the items that are on there and start thinking about organizing all of your tax information, so as soon as your tax preparer is ready, you're going to be able to get that information in, get your taxes filed, and get that refund.
Okay, very good to know. Any sort of tools, tips when it comes to organizing to make sure that you have all the documents that you need and the information that you're submitting is fully accurate?
Yeah, so really the key is taking a look at the roadmap from last year. Most people, their taxes are somewhat consistent in terms of where they need to collect those documents from, whether it's your mortgage interest or your interest income or dividends or any of those types of things, your W-2. So you want to make sure that you follow that roadmap in getting everything organized as quickly as you possibly can.
Okay, very good to know, Dan. Any sort of estimated return that people can expect? Is it flat from last year, maybe higher, lower? For people who want to set a budget, what should they account for?
Well, it seems based upon the adjustment for inflation, as we talked about earlier, if you're making pretty much the same amount of money, you should be getting a refund or paying less or getting more of a refund. So we should be in a more favorable situation for this tax year.
Okay, very good to know. Now, in terms of filing, let's say you can't make that April 15th roughly deadline. What happens next if you can't get your organizational steps in place by then?
Well, you do have the ability to file for a 6-month extension, which takes you out to October. So that's the good news. You have more time to be able to get all of your documents together. However, keep in mind that even though you get an extension of time to file the return, you still have to have all your taxes paid in by that point. So it is not an extension of your tax payment. It's just an extension of time to file.
Okay, very good to know. For anyone who does actually owe the government money, do you think taking an extension is something to consider?
Well, if you're not prepared, taking an extension is always the right course. You just have to remember, if you're anticipating that you're going to owe tax, you got to make sure that you have that payment in by April 15th. So there's still some planning that you need to do before you can just say, well, I'm going to wait 6 months.
Yes. Okay, good to know. And in terms of keeping receipts, making sure that you have the proper documentation in case the government does reach out to you, Dan, what do you need to make sure that you hold on to?
Well, listen, all of the supporting documents which go into preparing your tax return, you, the taxpayer, you're responsible for keeping all that documentation. Remember, the tax system is basically on the honor system, which means they trust that you're going to file an accurate tax return, but in case they check, you have to make sure that you could support every single line item on your tax return, which means you need those original documents.
That's right. So that's where organization, I think, is very key. Some people do file by themselves, or they use, digital means to make it a little bit easier on them. When is the right time to know, or what's the impetus when maybe you should be hiring a professional to help you with your taxes?
Well, it may seem self-serving, but I would tell you this, that really everybody, unless you have a very basic tax return, which you're familiar enough to file yourself, you should have a tax preparer, a professional, do that for you. Why? Because the money that you spend to have your tax return prepared, all that preparer has to do is catch one mistake, and they're saving you money. That's why it's best to let people who are experts in the area do it for you, to make sure that you are getting every possible tax deduction that you can.
All right, Dan Geltrude, very organized. Thank you for telling us what we need to know ahead of that tax deadline. Dan, of course, is from Geltrude and Company.